next 4 months. But to start that effort, we've got some great witnesses here who we'll look forward to hearing. But I want to yield back now and let the ranking member have his opening statement, and then we'll get right to our great panel. With that, I yield to the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for joining us today. Section 702 expires April 19th next year. This gives us 4 months to put together a bill that prioritizes protecting Americans' fundamental constitutional rights while preserving a program that advances national security. Over the years, FISA has remained a subject of bipartisan collaboration on this committee, and I really want to thank Chairman Jordan and Chairman Biggs for working with all of the members of the committee to protect American civil liberties. When Congress reauthorized Section 702 last Congress, we gave the executive branch 2 years to show that it could protect civil liberties without the need for greater judicial oversight. We said that we would rely on the FBI's promise that the modest changes, like requiring approvals for U.S. person queries in the Reforming Intelligence and Securing America Act, or RESEAU, would be enough to prevent greater violations of civil liberties. And we promised in turn that we would keep a close eye on how surveillance authorities are used during that time. This 2-year experiment's nearly complete now, and the results are alarming. We have witnessed an attack on the FBI's internal guardrails against abuse of Section 702 authorities, and an unprecedented increase in government surveillance, and an alarming coziness between the government and big tech, all of which puts Americans' data and civil liberties in jeopardy. We must strengthen federal law to protect American privacy and liberty, and Congress can start with FISA Section 702. As everybody in the room knows, 702 was never meant to apply to American citizens. Under the law, the government can only collect communications from targets who meet 2 criteria. 1, they've got to be non-U.S. persons, and 2, they've got to be located overseas. Americans and people on U.S. soil are protected by the 4th Amendment that prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures, guarantees the warrant requirement, and if law enforcement wants to look at American citizens' emails, they've got to get a warrant to do it. Despite all these protections, because Section 702 enables the intelligence community to ingest an incredible amount of data, American citizens' communications are often swept up in 702 collection. When that happens, those records end up in the FBI's massive database, and under current law, the FBI can search that database for U.S. person identifiers like Americans' names and street addresses for evidence of potential crimes or threats to national security. And as the chairman says, 10,000 people have access to that. Administrations of both parties have repeatedly abused this trove of U.S. person data. Recent audits showed that FBI has searched the 702 database for candidates for federal office, Black Lives Matter protesters, and federal contractors, among other Americans who ought to be protected. 2 years since we enacted RESEAU, however you might have felt about modest changes in that bill, the landscape has changed. For years, the leaders of this committee have warned of how executive branch surveillance powers could be abused by administrations that don't show sufficient care for the protection of civil liberties, and who use cutting-edge technology to spy on Americans, and who ignore basic principles of due process and constitutional freedom to achieve their own ends. In 2025, we know that we were right to worry. Here's just one example. I've been concerned for years about the U.S. government purchasing and compiling data about our own people. That problem has been compounded in this administration, which is actively building profiles on American citizens by combining data traditionally siloed in separate agencies, your tax returns, your health records, any interactions with police, with information purchased from tech companies. The administration is breaking down the very few guardrails that still exist on protecting our privacy, enabling the executive branch to track the movements of dissenters and supporters alike. So we have a lot to be concerned about at this point. I'm glad we're proceeding in a bipartisan way for the legislative defense of essential constitutional civil liberties. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today on how we can properly protect American civil freedom in this perilous era. And I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman, the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman first. Without objection, all of the opening statements will be included in the record. We'll introduce today's witnesses. Mr. Brett Tolman is the Executive Director of Right on Crime, a nonprofit organization that advocates on criminal justice issues. He's testified here many times, previously served as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Utah, and is the Chief Counsel for the Crime and Terrorism for the Senate Judiciary Committee. Mr. Gene Scher is the General Counsel for the Project for Privacy and Surveillance Accountability, a nonprofit organization that advocates for greater protections for privacy, civil liberties, and government surveillance programs. He is also managing partner of Scher and Jaffe LLP, where he focuses on civil appellate matters. Mr. James Chernowski is the head of emerging technology policy at the Consumer Choice Center. He previously was a senior policy analyst at Americans for Prosperity. His research focuses on the issues surrounding technology and innovation. And Ms. Elizabeth Goyton is the Senior Director of the Brennan Center's Liberty and National Security Program. She previously served as Senate staffer with the Department of Justice. Her work focuses on presidential emergency powers, government surveillance, and government secrecy. I know many of you have been here before, and we appreciate the work you've done for our country and for you being with us today. We welcome all of you. And we will begin by swearing you in. Would you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and beliefs, so help you God? Let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You can be seated, of course. And please know, you've been through this before, that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. We ask that you kind of summarize that in 5 minutes, and we'll just go right down the line like you were introduced. Mr. Tolman, you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Oversight of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is a debate that goes to the heart of what it means to be an American. Commitment to the rule of law, the constitutional rights we hold dear, and the principle of limited government. FISA is in desperate need of reforms. Or rather, our country desperately needs to reform FISA. For decades, and with increasing regularity, it has been the government's permission slip for warrantless spying on Americans. This is despite the Fourth Amendment. To be sure, FISA serves an important national security interest. I would know I helped write some of the FISA laws when I worked as Chief Counsel over Crime and Terrorism in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I later prosecuted national security cases as a federal prosecutor. These credentials, however, don't contradict the harsh truth that the FISA system is flawed. It enables the unconstitutional government surveillance and doesn't protect our civil liberties presently. Nowhere is this more clear than with Section 702. Section 702 was sold to Congress as a vital tool to target foreign adversaries. We were given high-stake assurances by DOJ and FBI leaders, namely James Comey and Robert Mueller, that it would not be used improperly against honest Americans. I was in the room when they represented it would not be abused. That was a lie. FISA abuse is not speculative. There is clear record of systemic failure, constitutional betrayal, and the disregard for the rule of law, confirmed by the FISA court itself and government watchdogs. For instance, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation used flawed information and deceit to justify FISA surveillance of Carter Page. Proves the vulnerability the system is to political weaponization. Arctic Frost investigation, which targeted hundreds of American citizens, including sitting Republican lawmakers, highlights how domestic political matters are swept up by FISA. The FBI has carried out warrantless searches of Section 702 database involving American lawmakers, journalists, political donors, civil rights protesters. 1,600 searches were conducted for Americans who were at a specific airport on a particular day. 2,000 backdoor searches were done on athletes at a sporting event. NSA analysts searched for communications of prospective tenant and rental property that they owned personally, and for people met through online dating sites. This is not national security intelligence gathering, it is domestic spying. With FISA set for reauthorization in April, Congress faces an important question. Will we limit government or will we license its continued Fourth Amendment violations? Internal policy changes by the offending agencies are not enough. FISA must be rebuilt and reformed. Section 702, for example, it is necessary that Congress rewrites the government. It is necessary that the Congress requires the government to obtain a probable cause warrant if a search is done on a U.S. citizen in a domestic investigation. If this warrant requirement had been in place, the vast domestic surveillance of Americans under Arctic frost, for example, would have required judicial review and likely would not have occurred. Section 704, which lets the government surveil Americans abroad believed to be a foreign asset, would benefit from heightened judicial review, such as declassified and released court opinions and the use of third-party experts who can review Section 704 applications. Section 705B can easily bypass the requirement for comprehensive judicial review, allowing the government to move to a more intrusive form of surveillance with less scrutiny than a new probable cause application would require. Reforms should center on the consistent probable cause decisions. Lastly, FISA courts need structural reforms, such as penalties for omissions or misrepresentations like those used to target Carter Page. The FISC should also incorporate third-party advocates to balance the weighted government proceeding and declassified FISC rulings. In conclusion, Congress must not be complicit in facilitating a surveillance state. It must either mandate reforms or allow authorities like Section 702 to expire. I applaud this committee and its leadership for its thoughtful review, and I stand ready to work with you to craft reforms that are conservative in principle, effective in practice, and constitutional in design. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Scher, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan and Ranking Member Raskin and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at this hearing, which is particularly timely as we prepare to celebrate the Declaration of Independence next year. In considering the reauthorization of FISA Section 702, which my organization supports, the overriding question faced by this body is the extent to which it will allow the intelligence community to continue engaging in warrantless surveillance of Americans and without, as the Declaration put it, the consent of the governed through its representatives in this body or otherwise. And as you know, absent consent or truly exigent circumstances, the Fourth Amendment generally condemns warrantless searches. And while last year's reauthorization was in many respects a good first step toward needed reform, at least 4 important issues remain unresolved. Number one, Section 702 still allows the government to search Americans' communications without a warrant through so-called backdoor searches. Number two, federal agencies routinely purchase and review our geolocation, internet search history, and other sensitive personal information from data brokers, all without a warrant and without allowing providers even to inform us of those searches. 3, a newly expanded definition of electronic communication service provider under last year's reauthorization allows the NSA to force countless small businesses and other organizations to assist in warrantless surveillance. It even includes houses of worship, thus ensuring that even atheists will now have to agree that someone is listening when we pray. There's still no provision, number 4, there's still no provision requiring the FISA court to include amici, experts who represent the privacy interests of all Americans, in Title I surveillance proceedings involving members of Congress, political campaigns, and other sensitive targets. So how then should Congress approach the upcoming reauthorization? First, we believe Congress should institute a warrant requirement with appropriate exceptions before the FBI or other agencies can search and review Americans' communications collected under 702. Just last year, as the chairman mentioned, this committee, in a near unanimous bipartisan show of strength, this committee voted to close that loophole, and it should do so again, and this time insisting on closing that loophole as a condition of reauthorizing 702. Second, it is critical for Congress to rein in the federal government's ever-growing purchase and warrantless searches of Americans' geolocation and other sensitive personal data purchased from data brokers. I applaud the committee for its impressive bipartisan work over the last several years to address this issue, but this next reauthorization is the time to insist that this data broker loophole also be closed. Third, the definition of electronic communication service provider under FISA should be narrowed to exclude houses of worship and countless small businesses and other organizations that were unfortunately included in last year's reauthorization. There's no justification for secretly coercing these entities to assist the NSA and the FBI in conducting surveillance. And fourth, Congress should require amicus participation in politically sensitive FISA cases by finally enacting a robust amicus provision of the sort that passed the Senate in 2020 with 77 votes. Nearly a decade after the Trump campaign and transition were illegally surveilled, this key reform, which would have prevented many of the abuses that occurred in 2016, is still not in place. And I have seen the impact of that outrageous abuse in my separate work representing Carter Page in challenging that abuse in court. And once again, I applaud this committee for including a robust amicus process in the reform legislation last year, and I urge you to do so again also as a condition of the new 702 reauthorization. In short, with every passing year, it's harder to square our emerging surveillance state with the consent of the governed articulated in the Declaration of Independence and embodied